I became a moderator on the site. So we would moderate the page, because there was some crazies. There's always crazies wherever we go. There are crazies. Okay, that process taught me a lot about how to moderate social media, particularly. I think overall, what did it do for me spiritually? It gave me a bit of hope that it was okay. That even though I was very remotely isolated, I was connected in other ways.
So that's interesting, because when we go to face-to-face meetings, I think that for most of us, probably like high 90% of us, that's where we first find hope.
Yep, absolutely.
And you found it in that.
I did. Yeah, it was there again for me to actually plug into, and it kick-started my recovery again. And that's what I knew. The penny dropped, and one day, when I was in that bad space, and it just reminded me, actually, this is, you need to go right back to the beginning. I mean, there were some really interesting members on that group.
I bet.
Many who came on, many were doing world service, many have a history in world service. There was a lot of people there that were involved in.
And that was in 92?
That was in the late 2000s, so late 2009.
Okay, when you first went to your first virtual meeting?
Yeah, okay. For my own experience. Well, I don't know whether you'd call it a meeting. I mean, I guess actually in the strictest definition, it was an NA meeting.
So, I know that there's phone meetings. Have you been involved with phone meetings?
I've attended phone meetings once or twice. Most of the phone meetings that take place are in the US. NA by phone being the main one nowadays. But as far as I'm aware, the first phone meetings in the US kind of started, that were kind of organized, with around 2008. It's called Bridge, still exists today. But going back, if you like, and the history of that is really interesting if you look at it. I mean, it started by meetings by mail. And I think it reflects the way that as a fellowship we've adopted the technology at the time that we've had available to us. And when I jokingly say that in 1953 what we had was clay tablets and sticks, and we would write meeting lists on clay tablets and sticks. I mean, pens and paper. Okay, and then someone invented a cassette and a copy machine.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, oh, yeah, we can do that.
And the ditto, yes.
Do you know what I mean? And over time, our fellowship has adopted whatever technology was available for it at the time to find new and innovative ways of carrying the message. So, I mean, as a point of interest, I'm aware of the fact that the first evidence I've ever seen of an NA helpline was Jimmy Kay's personal phone number, and he would put that on literature. So it's not new for Narcotics Anonymous to adopt the technology that's available.
Right.
And in the mid 90s, I mean, we didn't get the internet until really usable internet until the mid 90s. I am aware of one group in the mid 90s, 94ish, who were running meetings via email. The first instances I've come across, a guy called Lee P was involved in that, and it went on, and then it moved on to a thing called IRC, which was Internet Relay Chat, which kind of came out of the gaming world. That was in real time, so I mean, it was more or less in real time, but it was all in text. Nobody saw anybody. So NA members, using the technology available to them, started meeting on IRC rooms.
And I always think of this when I think of us, like we're just like flowers through the concrete. We will reach towards the sunlight in any way we possibly can. It's like, those that are in recovery who understand that we have to do this in order to keep what we have. We have to continue to do these basics if we want to keep the life that we've been given. And it's a matter of survival, not so much like, luxury choices, but it's about, we know what we need to survive. And so as you're describing this, I'm wondering was the need that drove addicts to reach for message boards, to reach for email, to reach for mail. I mean, these aren't easy ways to have meetings. You know, there's a lot of delay. You know, there's a lot of, work involved to communicate back and forth on a regular basis to keep whatever that connection that you were talking about. That's how important that connection was. But to keep it going, it's not as easy as just getting in your car, driving to a meeting, or even getting on, a virtual meeting platform and meeting. I mean, it definitely took time and work and effort and waiting and patience. And so was the reason that drove addicts to do that, was it because there weren't that many meetings at that time, but what was the driving force behind these other creative ways of having meetings?
I think that that really sums it up in a nutshell, really. I mean, if you've got an addict in a remote rural location, or even in some cities, I mean, we've become quite used to the fact that NA meetings are everywhere now. I mean, so even when I got clean in the early 90s in the UK, I mean, outside of the main cities, there weren't that many meetings. I mean, there was a hub of Narcotics Anonymous in a town not far up the road from me, 25 miles, which is featured prominently in the recent history events that have been taking place in the development and history of NA in the UK. But it didn't filter down that 25 miles down the motorway, the freeway, to where I was. So I think that's right. I mean, I think it is a response. I mean, I think once I personally became aware of the fact that Narcotics Anonymous was there and it was working in my life, because I'd seen it in my early recovery, in the recovery time I was in. The desire to get that back and stay connected to that was huge. I've always found it really interesting that we would go to any length to find the drugs we needed. Addicts will go to any length to continue to get what they need, whether that be drugs or recovery. So if there's a means by which you can communicate, you're going to do that. Because for me anyway, I had a realization very early in my recovery. I needed this in my life, and I wanted this in my life, and I was willing to do anything it took to actually continue to do that. Whether that meant getting in a car or traveling, doing the things that I needed to do, or starting meetings even, because it was important. And I started recognizing very early on the power of it.
Yeah, I think once you tap into that, you can't unsee that. You can't unfeel that amazing connection, because we've lived in isolation and shame for so long, and to connect with people that are, not only understand us, but have, they share hope. You get a vision of what your future can be. I mean, all of that. It's, for me, and it kind of makes me think of like what's happened recently. Not to judge what anybody else's choices are, but I know that I've heard a lot of people, not a lot, but several times I've heard people, oh, I just don't like those online meetings. And it's like, okay, but for myself, I can't, it's not about whether I like it or not. It's really not about, it's not like I'm going to a movie and I'm like, I didn't really like that movie. It's like, it's part of the system that keeps me, going, and I can't afford to take out a whole component. If my dealer had said, you have to contact me on, through virtual meeting spaces, I would have been on it. I would have been on it. No problem.
Yeah.
If he had said use carrier pigeon, I would have been like, where do I buy them? I'll get myself a pigeon right away, So it's the same thing with this. As soon as it happened, it's like, well, I know I was grateful to have been introduced to virtual meetings about a year or so before, because of people like you and Shane, because I was trying to get meetings into my reservation. So when COVID hit, I automatically knew, I think I know a way we can continue to meet in my area. So I was really, really grateful for that. And because of that, other people knew too. But we'll get to that later. So what service have you done in the virtual space?
Okay, right. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, it started off with me being invited to take part in that forum. I was asked to be of service in the forum, and it was a voting process. You got nominated and vote, and they had a vote, and and all that kind of stuff went on. And but very quickly, I mean, I discovered, as I said, I discovered the UKNA presence online, and that time, which was like I say, around 2008, 2009, they'd moved on from the IRC stuff, and technology had moved on a bit, and they were creating things called chat rooms, which were more kind of specific. They weren't all in, basically. I mean, the old RRC rooms looked like the Matrix. It was just, whoa, I mean, all strange colours, and it was
Yeah,
very weird.
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, but the chat rooms themselves had became a bit more sophisticated, and they were running a very similar forum on the UKNA website at that time to the one that I'd found in America. So I got involved in a little bit of service on that eventually. But what I discovered, which was really a boon to me, was the fact that they were running these Java chat meetings.
Oh, I haven't heard that in a long time.
No,
But those
exactly.
were the chat rooms.
They were the chat rooms.
Yeah, that's right.
Java chat, but they were very structured.
I used to be involved in one in Yahoo NA chat.
Yeah, that kind of thing. There was a lot of them out there. Yahoo had one. I mean, there were Yahoo groups at one point meeting, using technology to kind of band together addicts looking for recovery, all that kind of thing. So my service involved, so my first ever experience of a virtual meeting, as such, was one of these Java chat rooms. And again, like I said, I was 16 years clean, sat in this attic office 40 miles from the west coast, from the mainland of Scotland, and nervous as hell. My hands were sweating, and I couldn't see anybody, I couldn't hear anybody, and I remember, I'd kind of plugged into it, and I could see what was kind of going on, and I got given the opportunity. It's like you were asked if you wanted to share, and so we learned to share in. I joke about this in short, choppy sentences. Because you couldn't sit there and type your entire life story out and then press enter, because everyone would be sat in the room like waiting for something to appear on a screen. So so that process, hello, my name's Steve, I'm an addict. Hit the enter button, and then a load of people would come back. Hi, Steve, whatever, and then you'd start one sentence at a time. I had an experience fairly recently, actually. I got asked to share in Iran through an interpreter, and that was it reminded me of that. It was like South sentence that was interpreted.
Oh yeah, right.
That was interpreted. It had the same kind of feel to it as those early chat rooms. So yeah, I got involved in that. I'd been going for a little while. Once they realised, that they had a member with a bit of clean time, they jumped on me and said, "Would you be of service?" And I jumped in with both feet and said, "Look, of course, please let me be of service," because that was another part of my process.
What was the average clean time like, do you think, in there?
It was mostly newcomers. And everything from people going to their first meeting to, there were one or two members that were doing service that had a bit more clean time than that, 10, 15 years, that kind of thing.
You think a lot of those newcomers, that was kind of like their gateway drug? It was their gateway to being okay, feeling not so scared to go to their first face-to-face meeting?
Absolutely. And that's actually a really, really important point in terms of the function of virtual meetings. That they are that. It was that is actually a really good observation, because that's exactly what they were. And I am aware, because over time you started to realise that people would be sharing in their short, choppy sentences and saying, after a couple of months or so, I'm going to my first meeting tomorrow.
Oh, it makes me want to cry.
Do you know what I mean? And then maybe a couple of days later, they'd come back in the meeting and say, "Wow, I went to this one. My first one, I was really nervous, but it was great because people really welcomed me." So that's, yeah, indeed. And I mean, it was as a gateway into their first experience of Narcotics Anonymous. I think it's a really good point to make about the function that the online meetings are able to fulfill. But I mean, I went on from that. I mean, I ended up. I mean, to start with, I was a moderator in one of those online meetings, and then I ended up being a chair for one of those online meetings. But they were interesting.
Like, what do you do as a chair?
Well, if you're chairing a Java chat meeting, basically you were responsible for copying and pasting the guide, the introduction to the meeting. Which is, you know, so it's the same stuff we have in every meeting. You know, the reminders.
Kind of like in the virtual meetings, the host is the one that's sharing the readings and kind of facilitating the meeting. Yeah.
Facilitate the meeting. You'd post the readings up and all that kind of thing. And then be inviting people to share. People would put their hands up virtually in the same ways they do on nowadays, you know, the virtual stuff. And yeah, there was kind of, we had effectively a breakout room. So if someone was struggling with the technology or wanted to talk, you could put them into a separate room and have a conversation, always in text, obviously. So there was, yeah, it was very reflective. It was different. I mean, getting involved with that for the first time was like, oh my God, what is this? This is just not normal. But I mean, over the years, it's become normal to me.
But so many people are experiencing that right now.
Oh yeah, it's exciting.
How many people are like, this is just crazy, but they're doing it and it's become okay. Doesn't, you know, of course, replace the same sense and connection you have with meeting face to face, but it's becoming okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think as well, that was my first being involved in that UKNA Java chat meetings, which are actually outreach meetings, by the way. They're supported by the region and have always been supported. I've always been supported by the region. There are no actual meetings. There are no committees as such. It's a function of the UKNA.org region website committee, effectively to manage and oversee them. They still run today, but they've moved platforms several times, and that was pretty innovative. And they started doing those in, I think, 1995.
So Java chat meetings are still going on. Is that what I heard?
They use a platform called GoToMeetings.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So they've evolved with, you know, they've been able to, well, which makes sense. I mean, once something becomes, you know, you can do more, then why not do more?
Well, exactly. Just go back to what we were saying before, you know, as the technology has progressed as a fellowship, we've found ways of adopting it to carry the message. And, you know, I think, you know, that's the same process, really. And who knows where we go next? I mean, holographic meetings, God only knows.
How do you think that, well, how many people are still involved that were involved then?
In those same meetings?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'm not sure if there are that many. There was one member who actually lives in Florida, who I do know is now still involved with virtual meetings on the new types of platforms, who did service there for many, many years. I think I was involved with those meetings for about maybe 3 years, something like that, 2.5, maybe 3 years. But there were kind of issues. I had issues with it in terms of, I felt the need for autonomy. I felt the need for those groups to kind of be allowed to grow up, if you like, and sort of step out and become self-supporting. But they were outreach meetings, and they are kind of couched in that way. So I mean, it's like your local fellowship development outreach committee might say, well, actually, we'd like to facilitate some meetings for newcomers or whatever it might be, and that was kind of the rationale behind that. It was providing a service. I mean, one thing I would share about that was that there was one year we ran a New Year's marathon, which went for about 8 hours, I think, online in Java chat, and it was one of the first experiences I had of really being aware of the fact that it was a very global connection. I mean, there were members there were more than one, there were 2 or 3 people doing service to those meetings in the UK that were in the US. And we would get members from all over the world.
Nice.
You know, which was even back then with that level of technology, which was pretty simple. It was, you know, sticks and tablets of clay, really, compared to what we've got today. You know, that sense of connectedness became global. You know, so that was on the back of what I'd experienced in that forum of being connected on a global level. And there were members in that forum, that DCT forum I was a part of, from all over, like Europe, Asia, Australia, many of whom I still know today. You know, many of whom I connect with today still. You know, the sense of community, I think, that's what I kind of plugged into right at the very beginning of my experience of online cyber recovery, whatever you want to call it. And we don't really have the words for it yet, do we? As such, how do we describe it? But yeah, so.
I like the term remote meetings. I think that's, and also virtual meetings have been, yeah, but yeah, that word, I don't know. So, and you mentioned this question too, do you believe virtual NA meetings are real?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, kind of going on with the story, if you like, coffee pot and resentment. All the best NA meetings are started on a coffee pot and resentment. And I developed a bit of a resentment against the people that were involved in that first bunch of meetings I was involved in, because they wouldn't let us stand up. They wouldn't let us kind of take responsibility for ourselves and sort of go out in the real world and be grown-ups, if you like. You know, so out of that came, there were 4 members. There was myself, one of my sponsees, another member of an island called Iona, which is also off the west coast of Scotland, and a guy who's actually a recluse. He rarely comes out of his house, but he has recovery. Decided that we would start a new meeting, and at that time, Skype became available. I was going to say the first bit of history. The first Skype meeting that I'm aware of was started by a member called Narcus Skypia. If anyone's interested, there is the story of that group is in NA Way magazine, I think from 2010. I think it's May 2010 it was in there. Fascinating story. But it kind of inspired us to think, well, we can do the same thing. We can start meeting online.
I mean, really, NA is not here. The purpose of NA is not to have meetings in buildings. That's not the purpose. It's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose does result in us having lots of meetings in buildings, but that is not the primary purpose of NA. The primary purpose is, you know, to carry the message so that, and then the result of that is that people get clean, and not only do they get clean, they stay clean, but then they find a new way to live, which is, you know, the other part of that. Not only, you know, it's not just about getting clean and hanging on by the skin of our teeth every single day, just, you know, white knuckling it through every 24 hours, but we get to develop a whole new life. So if that's happening, I mean, in my own my personal opinion is that if addicts are coming together and that therapeutic value is happening, and they, you know, the 6 points in the group booklet, you know, you meet at a certain time, and I mean, we can go through all of that, but I mean, and the message is carried, and it's a Narcotics Anonymous message, and, you know, those ideals are met, and people, the real litmus test is, are people getting and staying clean through those meetings?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I kind of got a bit distracted, so I apologize. Kind of going back to your question: are virtual meetings real? Are they real meetings of Narcotics? Are they real groups of Narcotics Anonymous? It's got to be an equivalent. Yes. I mean, that same experience I had in the old Java chat meetings of seeing members saying we're going to our first meeting, and being aware of the fact that they would continue to come back. And be there week after week after week, and you would see them pick up their 30 days and their 60 days and their 90 days and their 6 months and their 9 months, which is kind of the process, if you like. I mean, I've seen that reflected so much in my own in my own experience in the groups that I've been involved in doing service with. I mean, what came out of that Coffee Pint of Resentment was the Highlands Islands Groups and Narcotics Anonymous, which have now been in place since 9 years this November.
Wow.
You know, and it's a privilege. It's amazing to sit and watch and listen to people coming into a room, and it doesn't matter where it is. And I think this is really, what you just said is actually really important. And it is, are we creating an atmosphere of recovery in which people can find that recovery and provide a vehicle for them to fulfill the promise of Narcotics Anonymous, which is to stop, you know, lose the desire to use, find anywhere to live. You know? And if we're doing that, what else is there, you know? And I was in a meeting a few years ago in Glasgow Convention, and we'd set the room up. We had a screen with the people that were online, and we had a bunch of people in the room, and we'd started the meeting. We'd got people to share from the virtual room, and we got people sharing in the room physically that we were in. And someone started sharing from in the room, and they said, "I'm so-and-so, my name's Alex." And it was a girl, and she started expressing her gratitude for the meetings. And it turned out that, and it suddenly dawned on me, oh my God, I know who this is. And it was a member that had plugged into our virtual meetings, who at that time was in a very remote part of the world, in bits, you know, in the same way that I was in bits those years before, sharing her gratitude for actually the fact that that had been there for her, because and she genuinely shared that it had saved her life.
Wow.
You know, I'm, you know, seriously, you know, I mean, I'm just being really emotional about that, and you know, you see that happening. So there's no doubt in my mind at all that what the virtual meetings represent are that gateway for those that cannot or are unable to find themselves in face-to-face meetings. You know, and I think it's really just, I think it's just another tool.
It's a resource.